want to do is go over quickly. I want to quickly go over the exam and then move on to our continuing discussion on economic developments. I do want to apologize for Monday's class. I got my last COVID shot, and it did not, it gave me some of the side effects that was expected. Just felt like a very bad flu, feverish, achy, chills, generally feeling miserable. So I wasn't going to be good to anybody, including myself. I said, okay, we'll try and see what we can do going forward. Okay, let me see if I can bring up your exam paper. Let's see, new share. Okay, so you should be able to see the exam paper here on your screen now. And very quickly, I think what tripped up a few of you was that even though the questions seem relatively straightforward, you really have to read it in its entirety rather than skipping through it to make sure that you understand exactly what the questions being asked of you. Okay, it's also relatively straightforward. Study of choices made by consumers, firms, and the government, and how these choices affect the market for a particular good or service. This is what we describe as microeconomics. Microeconomics is a study of choices and how those choices affect markets. On the other hand, the broad-based definition, the study of choices made by people who are faced with scarcity, this is what we call economics. And we break that up into macroeconomics, which is the study of the economy as a whole, and microeconomics, which is the study of markets. Economists who study the economy and operate at or near full employment and who believe that the markets will always return to full employment. We have recently talked about these. These are classical economists, long-run economists. They believe that the market will always get back to full employment. It will always get back to equilibrium, that there are market forces that always pushes us back to equilibrium. If you recall the cyclical diagram, earnings by households for the use of labor resources, this is one we really should not be getting wrong. For the use of your labor resources, you get wages. Right? You give them hours of work, they give you money. The four general components of GDP are consumption, investment, government purchases, and net exports. The only one that fits here is B, investments. Let me talk about that should be, that's spelled poorly. That should be the factor of production. The factor of production associated with knowledge and skills acquired by working through education and experience is called human capital. That is what we're trying to develop in this class as we go along. I have a job, but it's only part-time and I really need to be working full-time. I have bills. Clearly, you are underemployed. You're not structurally unemployed, you're not cyclically unemployed, you're not discouraged, you have a job, it's just you would want to work full-time, the job only allows you to work part-time. The three fundamental questions of economics include what to produce. That's the only one we've looked at. That's the only one macroeconomics addresses. What to produce, that will be A. If I've gotten anything wrong on your exam paper, please let me know. A lot of persons got...
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think I briefly saw the exam was sent to my work email, not my personal email, so I don't have it in front of me. In regards to this question, the three fundamental, you said what to produce?
Yes.
Is correct, not what goods do we produce?
No. If you go back to your class notes, I can pull it up very quickly. Well, not quickly, but I can pull it up. And new share, Here's our class notes. Okay, introduction to economics. What goods and services do we produce? The other two questions are how and who consumes it. All right. Okay, so back to our exam. Factors that affect demand. All of these listed here affect supply. Exports, price of exports doesn't factor into it at all. Number of producers affect supply. Technology affects supply. Taxes and subsidies affect supply. So the answer is 9, and none of the above. The economic principle that indicates if one input increases while other inputs are held constant, then output will eventually increase, but at a decreasing rate, is the principle of diminishing returns. I think we've come across that enough that I can't recall anyone stumbling over that particular question. This question, however, I think just one person got this one. And I looked at the question again to try and understand why it seemed to have given nearly everyone an issue. A change in the price level, we said a change in the price level moves you along the demand or supply curve and is referred to as a change in quantity demanded or a change in quantity supplied. A change in any other variable shifts the curve, whether we're talking about demand curve or the supply curve. So a change in the price level moves us along the supply curve and is referred to as a change in quantity supplied. All right. I did highlight this one to put it on your final exam. So don't say I didn't give you a freebie. This exact question, exactly as it is going to be on the final exam. Which I finished writing, by the way, so I want to make sure I cover everything up to the point where I wrote the exam. Persons also had an issue with question 12. This one required more a sit down for 30 seconds and think about the question kind of approach. The price of product A falls. Consequently, demand for product B falls. Products A and products B are said to be what? Here's the thing. If the price of product A falls, we expect demand for product A to go up. Because if price goes down, demand goes up. Right? So if the price of product A falls and the demand for product A, you would expect to go up. If demand for product A goes up and demand for product B goes down, it must mean that product A and product B are substitutes. All it's saying is, the best way to do this is you relate it to real products in the world. All right. The price of Coke goes up. Sorry, the price of Coke falls. You would expect demand for Coca-Cola to go up. For companies who use colas to say mixed beverages, say clubs and whatever have you, if they choose to buy more Coke because the price of Coke went down, clearly they don't need to buy as much Pepsi. So their demand for Pepsi would fall. Coke and Pepsi are clearly substitutes. There isn't, I thought it amusing for a moment that more than one person decided there wasn't enough information to make a determination. Question 13, a situation in which at the prevailing price, whatever the price is, consumers want to buy more than producers are willing to sell. That means demand exceeds supply. That's a case of excess demand or shortage. But since the word shortage isn't in here, only excess demand, we would choose B. Which of the following is not a requirement for market equilibrium? You really don't need cash. Credit cards, debit cards, whatever. The only thing you don't need cash. For market equilibrium, We don't want government influence in the market. We know demand should be equal to supply with no pressure on prices, and all viable transactions should be completed. Question 15, to go from GDP to GNP. So to obtain GNP from GDP, we just simply add net income earned abroad. Relatively straightforward. There's nothing else that would fit. I did note that despite the fact that you were able to go to your notes and look at the equations or the, person still decided to choose subtract net income as opposed to adding the net income. I'm not sure why, but so be it. 16, as I graded this one, I thought perhaps it was maybe a skosh unfair, maybe, but I decided to leave it as it is anyway. Which of the following was not be included in the calculation for national income? National income includes corporate profits for sure, interest for sure, wages and benefits for sure. The question is investment income, not investment. If it was just investment by itself, we know that goes into GDP, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. But investment income, money you get from your investments, clearly that will go into national income. Right? But I do know that a number of persons debated this in their heads and decided that somewhere between D and E. And I also have at least one person who decided they will choose both of them, which I really can't give you credit if you give me two answers. A grant from the IMF to help the Bahamas recover from the current pandemic is likely to place our economy outside the PPC. For no other reason that this is money that's coming from, this is resources that is originating from outside of our economy. Regardless of what our current state is, eventually you would expect that we would get back to the PPC in the long run, at least, according to classical economists. So any outside resources that we would have gotten would push us outside the PPC. Again, one of those that require perhaps a few moments to sit and think. Ceteris paribus, everybody got this okay. Holding all else constant, all other things being equal. We would accept both of those. A good tax system, people didn't have any issues with this. Sorry, I went too far. Good tax system, if you're going to talk about fair, those who receive the most benefits should pay the highest taxes, possibly fair. People in similar circumstances should pay similar taxes, possibly fair. People making similar money should pay similar taxes, possibly fair. People who have richer people should pay more taxes, possibly fair. All of the above, we think, to one degree or other, would constitute fairness if you're trying to develop a good tax system. Question 20, again, people didn't have any issues with this. I'm not working because the economy is bad and I simply gave up and I'll wait till things improve. I am, in fact, a discouraged worker. I'm not unemployed because I am no longer looking, and at least haven't been looking in the most recent time. And I gave up for lack of opportunity. I'm discouraged. I am not sure why we had a difficulty with this question, but apparently we did. When an economy finally bottoms out and things start looking up, we can look back and say, too many people chose recession. Remember, for a recession, our definition of recession is very clear and very specific, and no part of that definition is in this question. For there to be a recession, we said it has to be 6 consecutive months or 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, a downturn in GDP. This question does not specify that at all. I think it is possible that a number of persons inferred from this, but you cannot make an inference from what the question doesn't tell you. All you know is certainly A, B, and C doesn't fit. You would struggle to rationalize D. The answer would be E, none of the above. Because the correct answer would be, the correct answer would be when the economy finally bottoms out and things start looking up, we can look back and say we were at a trough. Remember, a trough is the lowest point on the business cycle. And it's at that point that things start looking up. Once we get past the trough. Question 22, what causes technological progress? Clearly people refer to their notes because I can't recall anyone having any issues with this. Investment in childhood education, necessity being the mother of invention, monopolies that spur innovation, and it helps if you have a sizable market to lure potential talent. All right. Again, I was pleased to see that most persons didn't have an issue. In fact, I don't think anybody had an issue with question 23. In considering the short-run production function as the basis for policy decision, if we were to increase immigration, we would expect adding this extra labor to the market will cause GDP to go up, but it will depress wages. It will cause wages to fall as these new entrants into the market bid down the average wage rate. Again, I'm not working, and people tell me that I need to go back to school. Right? I am structurally unemployed. The only way I'm going to get another job, more education, more training, I need to go back to school. Question 25, GDP does not capture all economic activity. It doesn't account for change in environment, true. It doesn't account for criminality and illegal behavior, true. It doesn't account for I guess, unofficial market actions like bush mechanics and hairdressers, salons that you have from your converted garage kind of thing. It also doesn't take into account unreported tips. So all of the above. Demand is applied. Most people did this very well, and those who didn't do it well did it very, very, very poorly. All right, so I don't know how I could do this. Anyway, we'll see. At what price does demand fall to zero? All right. Let's see. Here, I can do it here. Let's see. Layout. Single column. Okay. All right. So we go QD is equal to 150 minus 15p. And at what price does demand fall to zero? So demand is 0 equals 150 minus 15p. I like my prices to be positive, so 15p equals 150. Therefore, P is equal to $10. Easy enough. So the answer then, of course, is obviously B. If price is not issue, how many bags of scaled fish would consumers want? So again, QD is equal to 150 minus 15p. And it says, if price was not an issue, which means I'm gonna put price at 0, QD equals 150 minus 15 times 0. So I end up with QD is equal, oops, why up there? And with QD is equal to 150. Price is not an issue, we would want 150, which was D. at a price of $2.50 a bag, how many bags would be demanded by consumers? Sorry. Columns 1. All right, so QD is equal to 150 minus 15p, and a price is 250, so QD is equal to 150 minus 15 times 250. 250. All right, so QD is equal to 150 minus, let's see. Here's my calculator, and I have 15 times 250 is 3750, 37.50. So QD, therefore, 150 minus 3750, that looks like 112.5. So the answer would be A, 112.5. Calculate the market clearing price and quantity of bags of fish for these fish people. All right, fine. So it said, what first step 1, we set QD equal to QS and solve for P star. I don't need you, I need tab. So QD is 150 minus 15p. And we set that equal to QS, and QS was 5p. I'm hoping I'm right. So I collect my prices. So I have 150 equals 5p plus 15p. I took the 15p over to the right-hand side, so it becomes positive because I've never known a negative price. Well, actually, there are negative prices, but that's so far out of our discussion. Don't worry about it. Let's see. I need to fix this. Hang on. Okay. So we end up with 150 equals 20p, which makes, what's 150 divided by 20? Where's my calculator? 150 divided by 20, 750. That makes $7.50 equal to P star. All right. If you're not sure how we did that, go back to your notes. We just divided both sides by 20. And I got us P equals 750. Without doing any more work, I go back to my answer and I see I have the possibility of A, P equals 750, and C, P equals 750. Now, I then plug that 750 into my equations to see what I think is the right answer. So I have QD equals 150 minus 15 times, that new P star is 750, tab, QS is equal to 5 times that new 750. All right, and we end up with QD, equals 150 minus 15 times 7.5. Go back to my calculator, 15 times 7.5, and a bit 112.5. 112.5, tab over, QS is equal to, what's 5 times 7.5? 5 times 7.5, and up at 3750, 37.5. So now, oops, QD is equal to 150 minus, oh, sorry, no, I did that. What's 150 minus 112? That is, that's exactly 37.5. So I now know my QD and my QS are both 37.5. So I'm looking for an answer where P is 750 and Q star is 37.5. And that is A. All right. Let me, paragraph. Okay, so shall we continue? What is the maximum price to the nearest dollar that can be charged and still sell at least 11 bags of scale fish? All right, let me make some space to work. Paragraph. Okay, so I know now I'm looking for a price and I need to sell at least 11 bags of scale fish. So QD is equal to 150 minus 15P. And I said I need to sell 11 bags. So 11 equals 150 minus 15P. Let's make the prices positive. So bring the 15P over. 15P equals, the 150 didn't move, but the 11 goes in the other direction. So that becomes minus 11. So I have it 15P equals 139. Therefore, P is equal to, I don't know, 139. Did I do that right? Divided by 15?
Mr. Demerit, you have a 9 in the place of the P.
Thank you. All right, so let's see if I did that right. 139 divided by 15, 9.2666, and the P equals $9.27. Or really it's 9.266666, but since we're dealing with money, $9.27. All right, so now that I've solved at $9.27, I would sell exactly 11 bags of scale fish, but I price my fish in whole dollar amounts. So the possibility is only, we know it can't go up. So P cannot be equal, P cannot be equal to $10, right? We know this for a fact, right? So since we know we can't go up above 927, we immediately eliminate the $22, which is A. We eliminate the $17, which is B, and we eliminate the $10, which is D. The question, though, is that we know in an ideal world, we will be looking for P equals to $9. The problem is that $9 is not an option available to us. All right. We can either charge $8 or $10 or $20 or $17. we don't have the option of charging $9. So the only possible price that we can charge and still sell at least 11 bags of scale fish, and the price has to be in whole dollar amounts, the only possibility is $8. We can't go up. We know that for a fact, but that doesn't mean that we can't go down. Ideally, we would like to charge $9. That would work for us ideally, but $9 is not available to us. That's not a price that we have the option of charging.
Mr. Demerit, you trick us on that one.
Because
Why?
I trying to figure that out as well.
I got 9 point whatever, and I was like, I
Yes.
can't charge 9, so it have to be none of the above. I didn't realize that
Why can't you charge 8?
because the answer came to 9. So
No,
Nine.
no, the answer didn't come to
it came to
9.
9.2, whatever.
No,
That's what I got.
What did the question say? What is the maximum
What is the
price to the nearest
maximum
dollar?
price?
Yes, that
Would
can
the
be
nearest
charged.
dollar be $9?
Exactly.
But
That's
9
why
is
I
not,
said he
9
tricked
is,
us on this
no,
one.
9 is not an option.
Yeah, but none of the above is an option.
Yes, but 9.
And 9 is
8
not there. So
Yes, but
the
here's the issue.
logical answer would be none of the above.
Yes, but $8 is an appropriate and correct price that you can charge. Is there a reason
Technically,
why
if
you can't charge $8?
No, there's not a reason why we can't choose. We know we can't go above. Okay, we know we can't go above or whatever we came to is 926.66 or 927. So we cannot go above that. But I did
Right.
look at $9 as an option because it's beneath that which we said is our maximum price.
Yes.
We could have used 8, but we know we can't go higher than 927 because that would put us out of whack. That's why I think, personally for me, I put none of the above. I'm
So
guilty
did I.
of that.
So did
I'm
I.
guilty of that.
So did I.
Let me
You
help-
trick us
let me-
on this one.
No. Like I've told you guys time and time again, this course is required at the very least that we think our way through some of these. Because we know the math is not an issue. So it's always going to be, can we think our way through the problem? All right, I'll throw you another freebie. Not this exact question, but a very similar question like this is going to come up on your final exam. And it's going to be even worse.
That's not cool, Mr. DeVere. That's not cool at all.
No, when I say worse, okay, what can be worse than what we see here? Suppose you have, you did this question and 8 wasn't there, but P equals, let's say, $5.
We could go as low as we have to make sure that we sell the least amount of bags.
You can go as low as you need to, as long as you sell at least $11, 11 bags, and it has to be in a whole dollar amounts.
Okay, see, now that we know that. Okay.
But we had this discussion.
Yeah, you trick us though. That's okay. You're gonna trick us again.
Fine.
Thanks.
I don't necessarily agree, but okay. All right, so now this one again, very similar, and persons who he got 30 wrong tended to get 31 wrong as well. Let me work it out. Let's see. Okay. All right. So, what is the maximum number of full bags? So it's whole bags. There's no half bags, quarter bags involved in this, and the price cannot fall below $3.50. So we do the same thing. QD is equal to 150 minus 15p. And they said, what do we have? We have the price of $3.50. So QD is equal to 150 minus 15 times $3.50. All right. So QD is equal to 150 minus what's 15 times 350? Where's my calculator? 15 times 3.5 is 5250. Is 52.5. Therefore, QD is equal to, let's see, 150 minus 52.5, 97 and a half, okay? 97.5 bags, right? But we don't want a half a bag, all right? We only sell full bags. So the option, of course, is 97 bags, 97 whole bags, or 98 whole bags. All right. The question is, if we were to try to sell 98 whole bags, what would have to happen to the price? Okay, let me put it this way. Is 98 whole bags more than 97 bags? For sure. If we know for a fact that demand and price, quantity and price go in opposite directions, you'd agree with me?
Yes.
Okay. So then, 97 and a half bags is what we worked out our answer to be. So if we were to go up to 98 bags, QD goes up, what happens to price? Does price not have to come down? Because we say quantity and price go in opposite direction. So if QD goes up from 97 and a half bags to 98 bags, the price would have to fall below 350, right? They go in opposite directions. So we know for a fact the price cannot fall below 350. We already established that as a given. Okay. Let me work out both possibilities, and we can see. It's sometimes trying to sort of ponder it in our heads, it doesn't quite work. All right. So we have two possibilities. We have Q is equal to 97 bags, or Q is equal to 98 bags. All right, so let's do both. So we have QD is equal to 150 minus 15p, and let's tab over and do the same thing. QD is equal to 150 minus 15p. Right. Now, we said we're looking at 97 bags. 97, our new QD, is 150 minus 15p. And we are also testing QD at 98 equals 150 minus 15p. Yes, I see that one above. That should be a 0, not a 9. All right. So we end up with 15p. So we bring the p over to make it positive, equals 150 minus 97, because when we move the 97 over, it becomes negative. And we have now 15p on this other side. 15p is equal to 150 minus 98. All right, so 15p is equal to, what's 150 minus 97? 150 minus 97 gives me 53. And this side, oops, went too far. 15p is equal to 150 minus 98 then is 52. Yes. All right. Sorry, let me scroll down a little bit further so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So now then we have P must be equal to 53 divided by 15, tab, too far, P is equal to 52 divided by 15. All right. And let's go to our calculator. 53 divided by 15 is equal to $3.53. P is equal to $3.53. And P is equal to 52 divided by 15. 52 divided by 15 equals $3.47. All right. So back to our question. Our question says the price cannot fall below $3.50. So we cannot charge $3.47. And $3.47 is associated with the 98. So when we look at our answers, we know we cannot choose 98 because it would require the price to fall below $3.50. But at 97 bags, $3.53 is associated with 97 bags. And since those are only two options, 97 or 98, the answer would be A, 97. Again, sometimes it just require you to work out both to see for sure what the answer is. Because quite frequently, when you see questions like this, the possibilities are going to be so close that you can't immediately look at it and say, okay, this is what I think it's going to be. Okay, are we finished with this section? No. Oh, given the market, I went too far. Given the market price of $4 a case, how many cases will ACFC be willing to supply? I thought this one was a giveaway, but apparently not everyone thought that. Paragraph. Right. So because we see AFC will be willing to supply, we know we are using our supply function. And our supply function, QS, is equal to 5P. QS, therefore, is equal to 5 times $4. So therefore, oops, we will be willing to supply 20 bags at a price of $4. Okay. For these ones, I want to bring in my, I'm going to bring in my Excel spreadsheet because I already have everything built into it. I'll save myself some headache. Let's see, new share. Okay. Now, if you have your exam with you, I'm sure you do. And I think, I do want to apologize because I think you end up getting an extra insertion, a table that should not belong there. But I was very pleased that everyone worked around it and I didn't have to give away any free points, you know, because people did something they weren't supposed to do. Okay. So, let's see, how do I do this? New share. Okay, here we have government purchases of 2,000, salaries of 5, income tax retained, profits, interest, etc. All right, so all I'm going to do is plug in those values into my Excel spreadsheet, and that should give us the answers that we're looking for. Consumption, according to our table, is 2,000. Investment is 1,500. government purchases is 2,000. No. Consumption is 6,000. And we have net exports. You've noticed that net exports is a positive number. So I add that as 500 and I end up with 10,000. And that, according to our...
Mr. Demerit, we're operating in a notion of millions, correct? Not thousands, right?
Yes, well, actually this is billion. So 10,000 million is 10 billion.
Can I see the chart again? Because I
Sure,
seriously thought I
absolutely.
said millions.
See, there is millions.
Right,
But 2,000 million is
because,
2 billion.
right,
So when you see something like that, it just says, okay, we just add a million to everything. So the unit is in millions. So this would be 2,000 million, 5,000 million, 1,000 million, etc. That made a difference.
Oh, just where you were saying thousands, I was like, wait a minute.
Oh yeah, I didn't include the units. I'm sorry. Okay, I can fix that. That's not a problem. For question 33, the answer was A, 10 billion. But since the way we have the answers written on your exam, it'll be 10,000. All right, GNP is GDP plus net income earned abroad. Net income earned abroad was 1,500. So we end up with GNP of 11,500, which was D. Net national product is GNP minus depreciation, and depreciation was 250. And the answer was 11,250, but since that wasn't on here, the option would have been E, none of the above. National income, regardless of how you calculate national income for this question, you came up with the same answer. So I'll do it both ways. National income was 11,250 because we got that from, we got net national product from our previous calculation, and we subtract from that indirect taxes, and indirect taxes or sales tax in this case is 1,075. We end up with national income of 10,175. Or if you prefer counting up the money, employees' compensation, that looks like salaries of 5,000 plus proprietor's income is 1,700 plus rental income is 1,750, sorry, plus interest income of 250, backspace, 250, and dividends of 300. And finally, corporate profits. Corporate profits is 1,175. And we end up with the same 10,175. So regardless of whichever way you would have used, and there's enough information here that you can use either way, you would have gotten the same calculation for national income of 10,175, which was B. Finally, you asked to calculate personal disposable income, but we can calculate DPI without calculating personal income first. And personal income is national income plus transfers minus retained profits. And transfers, we said, was 1,000 even. And retained profits was 1,500. So if you were making this calculation separately, you'd have come up with negative 500 that you would be subtracting from your national income, and you end up at 9,675 for personal income. But you're not being asked for personal income, you're being asked for DPI, disposable personal income. So for disposable personal income, we also have to subtract income tax from this amount. And income tax was 155. And we end up with 8620, which was C. The only
Just tell us 1 second for me, Mr. Laird. I just want to make sure I got.
Not a problem. Yeah, the primary difficulty with a question like this, especially when it's multiple choice, is that if you start off wrong, it's wrong all the way through, right? Which was different from where you got credit for a homework type question, where even if you've gotten, say, GDP wrong, but everything else that wrong answer in the correct manner, you got points for all the other questions, all the subsequent questions. That doesn't work like that for a multiple choice exam like we had this time around. We good to go?
Okay, yes, sir.
So then, now we're looking for question 38. Oops, I lost something. Don't do that, don't do that. Here. Okay, here's our nominal and real GDP. This is for, it wasn't Kurdistan, this was, baklava. I don't know why I chose it. I must have been hungry this day, because of course you would have known that baklava is a Greek dessert. Baklava. Not balaclava, which is something completely different. Anyway, whatever. So here's our normal: 7380, 70293, 17337, 72220, 168. And the real they gave us is 16318, 16254, 16932, 16359, and 15960. These type of questions clearly requires more practice because a lot of people struggled with this particular 38, 39, 40, all the way up to 40, 43, 41, 42 and 43 people didn't have an issue with. So the first question is, given the table to your right, nominal GDP between 2006 and 2007. To calculate nominal GDP between 2 years. All right. So what we're asking is, how much did the economy grow in 2006? The only way to determine how much the economy grew in 2006 is to look at where you are in 2007, subtract where you were in 2006, and then work out the percentage change. And the way you do that is your newest GDP minus your old GDP divided by the old GDP. So if we are putting in our calculations here, so we're looking for GDP growth between 2006 and 2007, and that is nominal. Right? So this would be equal, open brackets, 2007, which is new, minus old, which is 2006, and I divide that whole product by 2006. Right. And that works out to, what did I do wrong? New minus old. New is 17,737 minus old 17,220 divided by old. That looks right. All right, folks. Did I do something wrong? Okay, let's try it again. New minus old divided by old. New is, oh, I see what I did. Sorry. Equals new minus old divided by old. You see what I did? I was using the years as opposed to the values. And we end up with 3% positive. It's new minus old divided by old. So the answer turned out to be a positive 3% growth between 2006 and 2007. Then we were asked between 2007 and 2008, also nominal. 2007, 2008, so equals new minus old divided by old. And we end up with negative 2.5%. It should be negative because look at GDP in 2007, 70.
Is the internet out?
Sam, so someone's frozen. Oh yeah, it's internet.
Yeah, his freeze.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, because something went okay for a moment. Okay. Also, which means that, let's see. Let me see if we can now go back to share my screen. Okay, so you should be able to see the real versus nominal GDP calculations once again. So question 38 was 3%, which is A, and question 39 was minus 2.5%, which was D. Question 40 then, we're looking at real GDP. So we're looking at the other column between 2005 and 2006. So real GDP between 2005 and 2006. So it'll be equal, open brackets, new minus old, and divide whatever we got divided by old. And we end up with a positive 2.5%, which would be B. Question 41, given the table to write real GDP growth between 2008 and 2009. So between 2008 and 2009, so it'd be equal new minus old divided by old. And we end up with 0.39%. Like I said, I do encourage you to practice these some more, because these kind of things that will show up again. So that answer would have been A. Question 42, in which year was the highest nominal growth rate recorded? And if we fill out the rest of the table, I know it will require more work on your part when I could just sort of grab and pull it down. But, you know, c'est la vie. take that out. Highest nominal growth was 3% in 2007, and the highest real growth was 3.5% positive, also in 2007. And finally, let's look at employment for backcover. So this is questions 44 through 50. Let's see. Let's fill in some numbers. The fictional country of backcover has a population of 1 million. So let's put in my million, 1,000,000. That's my million, of which 950,000 are between 18 and 65. That sounds like my labor force. Oops, sorry. 950,000. It's my labor force. Total unemployment. 114,000 people are not working, but are actively looking for work. That sounds like unemployed, 114. Cyclical unemployment. These are people who let's see, wait. 114,000 not working, are actively looking for work in the last 30 days. An additional 19,000 require education and training. Those are structurally unemployed. So let's put those in, 19,000. 4,750 are transitioning between jobs. Those are frictional. So that's 4,750. Added those in. 47,500 are working at jobs well below their capabilities. That sound like underemployment. 47,500. 9,500 have given up because things are so bad. That looks like discouraged. 9,500. And 90,250 have been laid off due to economic reasons. That sounds like cyclical. So that's 90,250. And everything populates. So that tells me labor force participation rate, 95%. Check. Let's see. Hang on, let's fix this first. Let's no fill this. All right, now that, check 95%. All right. Unemployment rate, 12%, yes. That's A. Cyclical unemployment rate, 9.5%, that's B. Frictional unemployment rate, 0.5%, that's none of the above, that's E. Structural unemployment, looks like 2%, that's D. Underemployment, 5%, that's B. Discouraged workers, 1%, that's also B. I didn't notice any pattern of problems with the employment questions. The only issue that I saw across pretty much the whole class is the calculation of real and nominal GDP and some of the definitional issues that I think just requires a more careful reading of your notes. All right. So any issues with the grading, anything I got wrong, please let me know either by text or email. And in that case, shall we move on? Let's see. Let me clean up some space. And let's new share. Let's go back to our class notes. Any questions on the exam before we move on? All right. So we have approximately 3 more classes. I think today is what? Today is the 16th.
Yes, sir.
So we have, today's Wednesday, isn't it? Damn. All right. So we actually have, Monday's class, which is the 20th, and we have Wednesday's class, which is the 23rd. Yes, we have 3 classes. Although I suspect we will use that final class more for review than for much new material. So one thing I want to make sure that we had a chance to talk about this class and next class, well, more next class than this one, is Keynesian fiscal policy. We'll come to it in a moment. I'm just trying to bring us back to where we were. Wow, we did cover a lot, quite a bit.
I completely agree. I think we should
That we
stop.
covered a lot?
Yeah, we should
Good.
stop.
No, no, no. Okay, this is where we ended, right? Okay, fine. All right. So one of the things that last class, we talked about extending our whole understanding of supply to the economy as a whole. Right? We said we know how to look at the demand for a particular good or service, and how to look at the supply of a particular good or service. Okay? And we know then that the law of demand and law of supply as it applies to these goods and services. And we know what the demand curve looks like for any individual product. The demand curve is downward sloping because the law of demand insists that it be so. At a higher price, we want fewer goods. And as the price goes down, our demand for this product tends to go up. The reverse we know is true for the supply curve. The supply curve is upward sloping, we said, because at lower prices, firms want to supply very few of this item to the market. And as the price goes up, they're more and more willing to supply more and more to the market because they can get more from each unit that they put on the shelf, each additional unit that they put on the shelf. We now said, can we extend that to the economy as a whole? What is true for one product in the economy should be true for all products in the economy when we put them together. 1 second for me, please. My governor's texting me. Now, why would he do that at 7 o'clock? It's always an issue. Okay. So aggregate demand really is looking at the demand for all the goods and services in our economy in total, as opposed to looking at each individual product. And in that case, aggregate supply is exactly the same thing, looking at the supply of all goods and services in our economy. So similarly, when we looked at the fact that there are factors that affect demand besides price, there are also factors that affect aggregate demand besides just price. Right? And the factors, when we're talking about, but really what we're asking is, what are the kind of things that's going to happen in our economy that's going to affect how much of everything we consume? We know if price goes up for an individual item, we may choose to buy less of that item. Right? But what are some of the things that may affect our decision to reduce our overall consumption of all goods and services? Or what are the factors that may have to occur for us to ramp up our purchases, our demand of all goods and services in the economy? Right? So when we're talking about aggregate demand, we're looking at things that's going to affect our demand for everything, not just individual products. And the first thing we know is that if the central bank puts more money in the hands of the commercial banks. That's what we mean by aggregate supply. That's what we mean by the money supply. The money supply is the amount of money banks have available to lend out. And that is controlled directly by the central bank. So how does that result in a change in the total demand for all goods and services in the economy? Well, think about this way. Let's say, for example, the central bank acts in such a way as to reduce the money supply, reduce the amount of money that banks have available to lend out. Central bank has a number of instruments that they can use to do this, but all we're concerned with at the moment is that central bank has drained the commercial banks of any excess money they have available to lend out. So in that case, then, there's going to be fewer loans being issued by banks because they have less money to lend out. And the money that they are going to lend out, they're going to save that for the customers who are willing to pay the highest interest rate to get that money. Now, that may be their very best customers, but that could also be the most desperate customers. In either case, then, because there are fewer loans being issued, and those loans being issued at a higher interest rate, there's going to be less spending. Because nobody borrows money from a bank to turn around and put it back in the bank. The only reason you would borrow money is to spend money. And you would be spending that money on goods and services. So if the bank's not lending as much, there's not as much borrowing. If there's not as much borrowing, there's not as much spending on goods and services. So aggregate demand falls. And of course, the reverse is true if central bank chooses to pump more money into the banking system, into the banks, while the banks are in the business of making loans. They want to put that money to work. So they're going to end up issuing more loans, and even issuing loans to sort of marginal clients at lower interest rates. So the money supply changes in the money supply directly affects aggregate demand, our total demand for goods and services in the economy. Secondly, taxes. Right? If government takes more money out of our pockets by, say, increasing value-added tax, clearly we don't have as much money to spend as before, so we can't buy as much stuff as we did before. The reverse is also true. If there's a tax rebate or a tax holiday, then we get to keep more of our money, and we're going to spend that extra money. Buy more goods and services, total demand for all goods and services go up in the economy. So in both cases, demand changes for all goods and services in the economy, whether you're talking relatively inexpensive, medium price, or premium goods, because more or less money is available. That's going to affect total demand, or what we call aggregate demand, for all goods and services in the economy. So money supply, taxes, government spending. If government spends more, government is buying more goods and services, government buys a lot of stuff. Total demand is going to go up. Other factors include foreign income and business confidence going to affect total demand for all goods and services in the economy. We do want to make note of the fact that the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping, just like a regular demand curve is. The only difference is the aggregate demand curve is slightly bowed, but for our purposes, is enough for us to understand that it's a downward sloping curve, exactly the same as the normal demand curve, because the law of demand insists that it looks that way. Then we have the aggregate supply curve. The aggregate supply is a little bit more complicated, because the aggregate supply curve, the two ways of looking at it, there's a long run approach to looking at the aggregate supply curve, a total supply in the economy, and then there's a short run or short-term way of looking at it. Think about this. In the long term, what we're talking about is the ability of firms in our economy to provide goods and services to the economy, to supply stuff to the economy. And you would expect that in the long run, right, all firms can always supply as much as the economy requires. You see, in the long run, there are no bottlenecks. In the long run, there are no shortages. In the long run, you can always build another factory. You can hire more workers, purchase more machines. See, in the long run, there's always enough. All right. So what we're saying in the long run, the aggregate supply curve looks at the economy as if it is operating on the PPC. So in the long run, it's assumed that all factors of production are fully employed. Right? If there is room to build another factory, we've built that factory. If there's room to hire more people, we've already hired those people. If there's room to bring in additional resources, we've done all of that. So in the long run, it is assumed that all factors of production are fully employed. Everybody's working, our factors of production are all humming away. Then the output that's being produced by the economy is the best that the economy can possibly do. And that is what we call full employment level of output. The aggregate supply curve in this case is vertical, straight up and down. We're doing as good as we can possibly do. Right? So in that case, if we're doing as good as we can possibly do, and for some reason, there's an increase in demand for goods and services in our economy. There's an increase in aggregate demand. Well, if we are already running flat out, right, we're already producing as good as we can possibly do, we're already on our PPC, right, and there's an increase in demand. I'm sure you know the Bahamian, maybe it's not a Bahamian saying, but I'm sure you know the saying, you cannot get blood from a stone. If we're already putting in our full effort, there's no slunking, no slacking, we're ready, and you want more, the only thing that can happen is that we end up bidding up the price. If there's an increase in demand and aggregate supply is fixed in the long run, the only thing that can happen is the prices go up. Because what's going to happen in reality is that there's going to be some persons who do not want to get shared out. There's an increase in demand for goods and services. You don't want to be the one getting shared out. So you're going to be willing to pay a slightly higher price to make sure you're not the one that got shared out. And that means by definition that the price is going to creep up, and it's going to continue to creep up. As long as demand exceeds supply, the price is going to continue to push up. And an increase in price, when you look at it an increase in price is one thing when you're looking at an individual product, but when we're talking about the economy as a whole, an increase in price of all goods and services in the economy is what we call inflation. So the long run aggregate supply curve is vertical, and if there's an increase in demand for goods and services in such an environment, the only thing that's going to happen is that you're going to end up with more inflation in your economy. Increase in aggregate demand in such an environment does not lead to an increase in aggregate supply because we're already flat out, only leads to higher prices, or what we call inflation. Then what about the short run aggregate supply then, or what we call the Keynesian aggregate supply curve? In this case, right, because we know in the short run, prices are sticky. Right? In the short run, we're stuck with whatever we negotiated in the last union contract. That's the price that we have to live with. Right? In the short run, prices are sticky, so therefore, output is determined by aggregate demand. How much we're going to produce is going to depend on what the demand is. Right? We've seen this certainly most clearly illustrated in our hotel environment. Right? Hotel may be only one industry, one sector, but we can certainly extrapolate this, and we can say this is the same thing happens to the economy as a whole in the short run. Right? Because in the short run, say between negotiated contracts, the hotel is stuck with whatever price it is negotiated with the union to pay the workers. Regardless of whether there's an increase in demand or a shortfall in demand for hotel services, you have agreed with the union that you're going to pay these people X amount per hour. Right? So the price is fixed in the short run. However, if there's an increase in demand, you have the option then of adjusting output or how much hours you're going to need these people to work. You can't change the price that you're paying them, the hourly rate, but you can change the number of hours. Because look at it this way. For every hourly worker, your wages is a combination of your hourly rate times the number of hours you work. If you get paid $10 an hour or you work 40 hours a week, you get paid $400. So it's your pay scale, your pay rate multiplied by the number of hours. In the short run, where you cannot adjust the pay rate, the only option available is to adjust the hours. The hours are the output. The hours are the number of hours that the worker is giving to the hotel, or really selling to the hotel. So in the short run, we say the aggregate supply curve is horizontal, or because prices are sticky in the short run, and the only thing we can do if there's a change in demand, we can adjust output accordingly. Prices are not going to change, output changes. So you want to be able to recognize the short run aggregate supply curve and the long run aggregate supply curve in terms of the shape. Because what happens most often is that you see this in a multiple choice section of your exam, where it lists, it asks you the shape of these curves. That's where you are most likely to see it. I won't be asking you to actually draw these curves, but I do want you to be able to recognize it if you were to see them. Okay. We are trying to work our way to policy, fiscal policy, because we are putting ourselves in a position of making policies that are going to affect our economy as a whole. And one of the things that policymakers are very keen on understanding is how households spend their money. So we're often very interested in the C part of our GDP identity. We said that income and GDP output is a combination of household spending, what we call consumption, business spending, what we call investment, government purchases, and exports minus imports. And in this case, we want to pay particular attention to the household spending side, the consumption. So we know that one component of GDP is households or consumer purchases of goods and services. And we generally refer to this as consumption. And in fact, what we've found is that consumption depends very much on the level of income in the economy. No surprise there. More income leads to more consumption. The better off the economy is performing, the more money is in our pockets, the more money is in our pockets, the more money we get to spend. So it is possible then to break up the consumption, the big C, into two separate components. We can break up the consumption function into two separate components, what we call the autonomous consumption, the CA. Right. And so autonomous consumption and the rest of our income. And we can walk our way through each of these in a moment. So autonomous consumption, CA. So when we break the consumption function down, that C part, we say every household including yours and mine, we have two sets of spending, right, that we combine to call consumption. The first is what we call autonomous consumption. It is that amount of your income, or that proportion of your income, sorry, let me try again. Autonomous consumption is that portion of demand that you have for goods and services, regardless of your income level. There's a certain amount of consumption that you have to do, even if you're not working. So regardless of your income level, there's a certain amount of spending you have to do. You have to have food. So you have to buy something to eat. You have to have some place to live, and you have to have some clothes on your back. So regardless of your income, you have a certain amount of demand for food, shelter, and clothing. And that's what we mean when we talk about autonomous consumption. And in fact, we can collapse all of those into what is commonly referred to as bills. You know, there are certain bills that you have to pay every month regardless. Right? You got to pay your BPL bill. You got to pay your cable or water. You have to pay, nowadays you have to pay your, it's called internet. So there's a certain amount of bills that you have to pay every month, regardless of whether or not you're working. Right? And that's what we call autonomous consumption. That money that you have to spend regardless. And you know that when you get paid at the end of every month, or whenever you get paid, you know that there's a certain amount that you cannot touch because I'd have to go towards bills. Now, of course, some people include things like tithes in that bill too, and that's fine. Whatever works for you. But there's a certain amount that a certain proportion of our income every month or every week or every 2 weeks, however we get paid, that we know goes towards bills. That's what we mean by autonomous consumption. Now let's look at the rest. All right. So we know there's a certain big chunk. For some of us, that chunk is bigger than other chunks. Bills, mortgages, loans, all of those would be autonomous consumption. Then we have, in our consumption function, we have this letter B. All right. The B is what represents what we call the marginal propensity to consume, MPC. The marginal propensity to consume is the proportion of additional income that is spent on consumption goods. Okay. Let's say you get paid every month. And let's make it typical behavior. 75% of your salary is committed to bills and loans, including rent, mortgage, etc. 75% of your salary, right up the top. Okay, but that also means that 25% of is left over after you paid all the bills. That includes things like school fee or whatever you need to pay for your kids, because these are things that have to be paid for regardless. Right? But at the end of the day, 25% left. Right? What do you do with that 25%? Only two things. You either spend it or you save it. That's the only other two things you can do with that. And you say, okay, I am investing in shares. Well, that's still spending. Or in essence, that is deferred spending. Right? You are saving through investment, but you're going to spend that eventually. Right? So the 25% that's left over is either going to be saved or it's going to be spent. Right? The MPC, sorry, the marginal propensity to consume, the B, right, that represents, of that 25%, how much of that is spent on consumption goods? How much of that you blow? All right. So when we're looking at the marginal propensity to consume, we say how much of what is left over we can blow. For a lot of us, that's 99, 99 and a half, 100% of whatever's left. You know, listen, I paid my bills, right? I paid tithes. I paid the children's school fee. Yeah, that rest, that should be for me to do what I want to do. So now, the marginal propensity to consume, the MPC, is between 0 and 1, where 0 represents you don't spend any of that extra money, you just save all of it, and 1 or 100% says that you spent all of it, you don't save any of it. So your marginal propensity to consume is how much of that extra money, the money's left over after paying bills, how much of that you blow as opposed to how much of that you save. And it's usually anywhere between 0 and 100%. So we assume, back to our notes, that all monies left over is either spent or saved. So if we were to break it up, marginal propensity to consume is the proportion of what's left that we spend, and marginal propensity to save is how much that's left over that we decide to save. It's the only thing you could do with what's left over is either spend it or save it. Then you're saying, okay, my salary is $3,000 a month. All right. And 75% of that is $2,100 goes towards bills and et cetera, autonomous consumption. That leaves me with $900 for myself. The only thing you could do with that $900, you can either blow it or you can save it. That's the only thing you can do at $900. Which means, let's say you blow 500, it must mean that you saved 400. You blow 800, that means you save 100. You blow 900, that means you save 0. The total has to add up to 100%, or in your case, $900. What you blow is what we call the marginal propensity to consume. What you save is what we call the marginal propensity to save. When you add the marginal propensity to consume and the marginal propensity to save, that must equal 100%. So how do we make use of this? From a policy perspective, because remember now, as policymakers, we're looking at what we see happening in our economy and trying to enact policy that's going to lead to economic growth and development. That's our goal as policymakers. So this whole consumption function issue is sort of a background item for us, and we said, okay, how can we use this to craft policies that's going to lead to economic growth? That's why, and remember now, we're still dealing in the short run, the Keynesian environment, because we said, remember, our goal is that we know, because the classical economist, the long run economist says, in the long run, we are going to get back to full employment. We're all going to get back to equilibrium. Keynesian, a short run economist, says, but in the short run, we're not in equilibrium. In the short run, we have unemployment. In the short run, prices are sticky. So in the short run, we have issues. So all of our policies, our policy discussions, our policy suggestions, our policy recommendations is intended to act in the short run while we are not at full employment. We're trying to address these issues in the meantime, while we're waiting for this wonderful nirvana that the classical economist is talking about, where everybody is back to full employment. So we're trying to address these interim issues. That's what Keynesian fiscal policies are about. And that's what the role of the government that we're saying. So how do we do this? Now we have this understanding about marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save. Right? So we have looked at our people, our economy, and we found that in general, Bahamians, whatever extra money they get after they pay bills, this is the proportion that they save, and this is the proportion that they blow, that they spend. The marginal propensity to consume this is the proportion of their monies that Bahamians have after they pay bills. This is the proportion of that what's left over. This is what they blow. Right? So if you look at this table over to the right for a moment, an MPC of 0.95 says that after you've paid all the bills, and let's use the Bahamas, for example, they say after you've paid all the bills, for Bahamians, 95% of everything that's left over, or 95 cents of every dollar that's left over, they blow. All right? And they save 5% or 5 cents on every dollar. That's what they save. Out of 95 cents, they blow. So marginal propensity of 0.95 says that 95 cents of every dollar that they have after they paid bills, they spend it on themselves or girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is. All right? That ain't gonna ever see no bank. A marginal propensity consume of 0.90 says that 90% of everything that's left, you end up spending, and 10% you end up saving. A marginal propensity consume of 0.80 says that 80% of what's left you spend and 20% you save. A marginal propensity of 0.75 says that 75% of whatever's left you spend and 25% you save. And the marginal propensity of 0.66 says that 66% of whatever's left you end up blowing and 33% you end up saving. So, bearing this information, we want to see how can we utilize this in our policymaking process. And that brings us to what we call the multiplier. The multiplier, in its most simplest form, is the ratio of changes in output to changes in spending. We have always assumed to this point, we know that GDP is derived from household spending, consumption, plus investment, plus government, plus net exports, X minus M. And we've said, if consumption goes up, all other things being equal, GDP is going to go up. If investment goes up, all other things being equal, GDP is going to go up. If government spending goes up, all other things being equal, GDP is going to go up. If net exports go up, all other things being equal, GDP is going to go up. So we've been working with the assumption that any increase in any of the components of GDP is going to cause GDP to go up. But in the back of our minds, we've also been working with the assumption that this is a one-to-one ratio. That a $100 increase in consumption, C, is going to lead to a $100 increase in GDP. That a $10,000 increase in government spending is going to lead to a $10,000 increase in GDP. What we're saying now is maybe that's not quite the way it is. And that it is possible that a 1% increase in one of the components of GDP may have a larger or smaller than 1% increase in the overall GDP. The multiplier says that it is possible, all right, there's a certain ratio, and it's not necessarily one-to-one, of changes in GDP when we change spending. Spending by households, spending by businesses, spending by the government. So the multiplier measures the degree to which changes in spending is multiplied into changes in output. In other words, when we increase one of the components in GDP, how much does total GDP change? So the multiplier tells us when we increase one of the components in GDP, it tells us how much overall GDP changes. Right? That's what the multiplier tells us. Now the multiplier, to calculate the multiplier, which we write as a capital letter M, here's our formula for calculating the multiplier, is 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC. And the only way to do this is through examples. Right? So here we are. We took each of the MPC from our previous table, and we see when we use those MPCs, what multiplier we end up calculating. So, for example, we said an MPC of 0.95 means that 95% of all the money that's left for us after we pay bills, we end up blowing, spending it on consumption goods. So, if that's the case, what does that mean for the multiplier? Multiplier, we said, is 1 over 1 minus the MPC. So we simply plug in the MPC of 0.95 into our very tiny equation, 1 over 1 minus MPC. And of course, you know you always solve what's in the brackets first. Always. So what's in the brackets first is 1 minus 0.95, which is 0.05. And we end up with 1 divided by 0.05. And folks, word of advice for these questions: always, always, always use your calculator. Because if you look at 1 divided by 0.05, it looks like that should be a small number. And it is not. Lean not onto your own understanding or misunderstanding. Use your calculator. Please, I beg you, I urge you, I beseech you. Do not think because it looks like it's easy to, I could do it by, use your calculator. Because what we found is that when we work the multiplier out for an MPC of 0.95, we end up with a multiplier of 20. That says that every $1 increase in spending causes GDP to go up by $20. That's what our multiplier says. That's what our M says. That M says, multiplier says that for every $1 increase in spending, GDP goes up by $20. What happens if you have an MPC of 0.90? That is 90% of everything that's left over, you end up spending and only 10% saving. Right? We work it out, 1 minus 0.90 is 0.1. Again, use your calculator. And 1 divided by 0.1 is not 1. And it's not 0, it's 10. If you don't believe me, use your calculator now and see for yourself. This means then, with a multiplier of 10, a $1 increase in spending leads to a $10 increase in GDP, the ratio of 10 to 1. And we can go down the list. An MPC of 0.8 means that 80% of everything that's left over after we paid bills, we end up blowing, so we end up saving 20%. When we work that out, we end up with a multiplier of 5. That says every $1 increase leads to increase in spending leads to a $5 increase in overall GDP. An MPC of 0.75 leads to a multiplier of 4. An MPC of 0.66 leads to a multiplier of 3.03, and an MPC of 0.5 leads to a multiplier of 2. So one of the things that you would note is that you would think that we would want our people to save. And we do. We be talking about economists and policymakers.
Excuse me, Mr. Demerit.
Yes, ma'am.
I was trying to work, I practiced all of those, and with the 0.66 on my calculator, I'm getting 0.34. So if we were in exam, would I still get that point even though my calculation is a bit off?
Actually, this MPC is 0.666666 indefinite. No, it would still be correct on the exam, because what would happen, I would normally ask something like this, where I can see from the question that I've written that it's going to come up with some decimal places. I would ask you for, say, 2 decimal places or 3 decimal places. That way I can see if there's been any rounding.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, because I'm getting 2.94 instead of 3.03.
Instead of 3.03.
Yeah.
You know what you did? You kept the 0.666666 indefinite. Well, 1 divided by 0.33 is a long string of 3s as well. But yeah, it won't be an issue.
Okay.
I will do my best to try and avoid that, because it's an unnecessary complication. You know, you don't have enough to think about without one like that.
Okay.
Okay. Now, we said that GDP is derived from household spending, what we call consumption, investment spending, government spending, right? And for each of those spending, there is a multiplier calculation, a multiplier formula for each of those spending. Fortunately for us, is the exact same multiplier. The only wrinkle in our consideration is when we're talking about taxes. So the consumption multiplier, as you can see, the investment multiplier and the government multiplier are all calculated exactly the same way. 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. The tax multiplier is very, very different. All right. We have, it's 7:48. Okay, so we have time, and what we want to do is work with each individual multiplier with a real world example and see how the kind of questions that you would be faced and how you would address those. Right. So we want to start with the consumption multiplier. The consumption multiplier we're trying to understand is that when there's an increase in consumption, household spending, consumer spending, right? When there's an increase in consumer spending, how does that impact overall GDP? Right? We know it's not going to be 1-to-1. It's going to depend on the MPC, the marginal propensity to consume. Right? So let's start with changes in consumption. If we assume that we have instituted some policy, government instituted some fiscal policy, the result of which is that there's a change in consumption level. This change in consumption is multiplied using the consumption multiplier to determine its ultimate impact on GDP. Okay. So let's say government has this budget, because right now they're debating the budget in the House of Parliament now. And there was some policy that came out of that budget that lead to a change in consumption by Bahamian households. One of the things that policymakers, long before the budget is presented in Parliament, one of the things that policymakers, both at the Ministry of Finance and Central Bank, would immediately look at as soon as this proposal first came up would be, how does that affect household consumption? And then how is that going to affect overall GDP? So you're telling me you're looking to institute some policy that's going to increase household spending by, let's say, 5%. Right? What we want to know is that when you do that, what impact is that going to have on overall GDP? And the only way we're going to be able to determine that is by looking at the marginal propensity to consume. Because all we're saying is that if whatever policy this is that you've implemented, that results in more money in the hands of Bahamian households. And that's fine, we're not arguing with that part. What are the Bahamian households going to do with that extra money? Right? After they pay the bills. Right? We know that a large chunk of that they're going to just spend, going to blow, and the rest they're going to save. Depending on how much they're going to spend versus how much they're going to save, that's going to determine its overall impact on the economy. Because think about it now. When they spend that money, they are purchasing goods and services. That is what we mean by causing the economy to grow, because they're going to be investing in the economy. When you say invest, buying goods and services, which in turn is going to lead to more investment by businesses, more employment. In essence, it's going to cause the economy to grow. Right? So we know for a fact that if they were to spend more on economic output, purchasing goods and services, that's going to cause the economy to go up. We want to have a very clear understanding of how much. And that's where the multiplier comes in. The multiplier is going to tell us how much that increase in household spending, how much that's going to translate to an overall increase in GDP. And that's going to depend on how much Bahamians save versus how much they blow, how much they spend. And the marginal propensity to consume is how much on average Bahamian households spend, or what's left over after they paid the bills. So here's our example. Right? Assume government fiscal policies lead to an increase in household spending of 25.5 million. Whatever they did, the precise policy is not necessarily our interest at the moment. Whatever it is, we know it's going to put an additional 25.5 million in the hands of households, Bahamian households. Right? We also know that on average, the marginal propensity to consume of Bahamians is 0.85. That means 85% of all the extra money that they get their hands on, they're going to spend on consumption goods and services. So only 15% of that is ever going to actually make it to the bank. So then, how does that affect the overall GDP? This 25.5 million that we put in the hands of households. So what we need to do is find out the multiplier. How much that $25.5 million is multiplied into at the end of the day. So we said the multiplier is 1 over 1 minus MPC. Right? Multiplier is 1 over 1 minus MPC. So let's do the calculation. Let me do it right. Let's make sure to remind ourselves that we always solve our brackets first. 1 minus 0.85 is 0.15. And 1 divided by 0.15, despite what our brains is trying to tell us, we're going to actually go to our calculator and plug it in. My calculator. 1 divided by 0.15, 6.66666666 indefinite. All right. And I rounded it to 6.67. Same thing you got?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So now we have calculated a multiplier of 6.67. This tells us that for every $1 increase in consumption, GDP goes up by $6.67. So then, for that $25.5 million increase in consumption, we can work out how much GDP goes up by. Let me put my generic formula down. Insert, no, let's copy this, sorry. And home base, okay. Change in GDP is multiplier oops, went too far. Okay, here's our general formula. Change in GDP is our multiplier times consumption. We just worked on the multiplier to be 6.67. The consumption, the C, we got from the question. You were given that. So the two things that you will be given. No, scratch that. We'll come back to that in a second. We worked it out, and please confirm my number. I got 170.085 million.
Yes, sir.
Or 170.09 million. Now, if you notice this generic formula, you have three unknowns. You don't know what change in GDP is. You don't know what the multiplier is, and you don't know what the consumption is. In the question that's given to you, you have to be given two out of those three. In this case, you were given consumption, and you were given the MPC, which allowed you to calculate the multiplier. So you have to be given two out of the three. Now it's possible, not possible, likely, that you will get questions in which you are given GDP and given the multiplier and asked to find C. That's just moving things from one side of the equal sign to the other. You've done that a million times, I am sure. So that's our consumption multiplier. First of all, we always calculate the multiplier using the marginal propensity to consume. And then we plug that multiplier into our formula and we solve for what we don't know. The investment multiplier works exactly the same way. If we assume that there's some government fiscal policy and that affects the level of investment, this change in investment is multiplied using the investment multiplier to determine the ultimate impact on GDP. For example, let's assume, for example, that government's fiscal policy leads to an increase in investment of $50 million. I know that seems like a tiny amount, but let's go with it. And also assume for a moment that in our economy, the marginal propensity to consume is 0.70, which means that out of all the money that we left after we paid our bills, 70% of it we spent on consumption goods and services, and 30% we put in the bank or some other kind of savings. So we end up with a marginal propensity to consume of 0.70. Let me copy this, because I'm going to need it. Copy. Paste. So similarly, what we did with the consumption multiplier, first of all, we have to calculate the multiplier. Right? And the multiplier is 1 over 1 minus MPC. You put our brackets, so we're reminded that we have to solve the brackets first. And 1 divided by 0.30, where's my calculator? Is 3.33333 indefinitely. So we now know our multiplier is 3.33. And that tells us for every $1 increase in investment, it leads to a $3.33 increase in GDP. So then that $50 million increase in investment, to see how that impacts GDP, we plug that into our calculation. GDP is our multiplier, 3.33, times our investment, which is 50 million. 3.33 times 50 million, where's my calculator? Here it is. 3.33 times 50 million, 166.5 million. Right. So when we implement policies that causes investment to go up by 50 million, we see the impact on GDP of a whole 166.5 million. This is a real world calculation, not the numbers themselves, but this is the real world calculation that we see at Bahamas Investment Authority and the Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of Finance. This is what they do when you have foreign investors come in. What they're trying to determine is that, okay, if we grant you a certain amount of concessions, and that's going to result in you investing, let's say, $2.5 billion in a new resort. What we need to determine that is, how is that going to affect the overall GDP of the Bahamas? Based on our estimates of what the marginal propensity to consume of Bahamians is. And I can tell you right now, the MPC estimate for Bahamians is right around 0.99 kind of thing. All right. Okay, so that's the investment multiplier. It's calculated exactly the same as consumption multiplier, 1 over 1 minus MPC. Where am I? I lost my space. Government multiplier, exactly the same way. If we assume that government's fiscal policy acts in such a way to change the level of government purchases. So government did whatever it is, they're spending more money, building more roads, bridges, more sidewalks, election coming, whatever it is. All right. They have implemented fiscal policies that has changed the level of government purchases. This change in government spending is multiplied using the government multiplier to determine the ultimate impact on overall GDP. So again, let's assume for a moment that government policies, fiscal policies, lead to an increase in government purchases of $44.5 million. Whatever they did, they end up spending an additional $44.5 million. If we assume an MPC of 0.95, which means that of all the money that's left over after we've paid our bills, Bahamians in general spend 95% of that and only save 5% of that. So first of all, we want to calculate our government multiplier using this MPC of 0.95. And we saw what's in our brackets first. 1 minus 0.95 is 0.05. And we go to our calculator because we can't trust our lying eyes. It would be 1 divided by 0.05, and our calculator tells us that that is 20. It looks big, it looks like that can't be right, so we do it again. Our calculator says, yes, that's what it is. Then we do it a third time just to make sure, and it's still 20. So we've calculated a multiplier of 20 based on an MPC of 0.95. So we plug that into our GDP formula, and we said GDP is our multiplier, which is 20, times our government spending, or G, which is 44.5. And let's go back to my calculator, and my calculator tells me 20 times 44.5 gives me 890 million. So think about that. Government increases its spending by 44.5 million. And the result is GDP went up by almost 900 million. That's the power of the multiplier. So you will certainly get in your next homework, which I'll send it out. I'll send it tomorrow. I ain't got nothing to do. Give you something to do over the weekend. And lastly, we want to look at the much more complicated multiplier, which is the tax multiplier. Now, it is important to note that unlike the other multipliers, which are all identical, the tax multiplier is significantly different than the other multipliers in its calculation. In addition, please remember the tax multiplier is always negative. This is due to the fact that changes in the level of taxes are negatively related to changes in the level of GDP. Think about this. If taxes go up, you're taking more money out of the hands of individuals, businesses, so therefore you would expect GDP to go down. And if taxes go down, you expect people got more money, people spend more money, GDP goes up. So taxes and GDP always go in opposite directions. So let's see if we can work through an example. If we assume that government's fiscal policies changes the level of taxation, this change in government taxation is multiplied using the tax multiplier to determine its ultimate impact on GDP. So here's our example. Assuming that government's fiscal policies led to an increase in taxes. They raised taxes by 70.77 million. Right? Whatever they did, it caused us to be taxed by an additional $70.77 million. In addition, let's assume that the MPC for the Bahamas is 0.80. Meaning 80% of every dollar that we get after we've spent on bills, after we paid our bills, we end up spending. And 20% we end up saving in the bank. 80% we spend, 20% we save in the bank. So, given that the case, let's look at a calculation for our multiplier. Our multiplier is minus MPC divided by 1 minus MPC. Minus MPC divided by 1 minus MPC. So let's clear our brackets first. In our brackets, we have 1 minus MPC. The MPC is 0.80, so let's go to our calculator. 1 minus 0.80 is 0.20. And our negative MPC we said is 0.80, so we end up with negative 0.80 divided by 0.20. And since we don't trust ourselves in this regard, we go to our calculator and we end up with negative 0.80 divided by 0.20. You got -4, same as I did?
Yes, sir.
We end up with a tax multiplier of -4. Now, we just said the tax multiplier is always going to be a negative number. Tax multiplier is always going to be a negative number. In this case, it's -4. So we plug it into our regular GDP calculation. Change in GDP is our multiplier, -4, times our taxes, 70.77. And we end up with negative 283.08 million. So government increased taxes by 70.77 million, and the result is GDP fell by 283.08 million. So what we focus our attention on is that the multiplier tells us when there's an increase in expenditures, either by households, by businesses, and by government, how does that affect overall GDP? The multiplier tells us how much every dollar in spending is multiplied into overall GDP, change in overall GDP. The balanced budget multiplier is just simply combining various multipliers. So for example, in this case, what happens if government increases taxes by 50 million and then turns around and spends that $50 million itself? So it took money out of our pockets. So we didn't get to spend the 50 million, but instead the government spent the $50 million itself. How does that affect overall GDP? Well, what we need to do is calculate how much that increase in tax, how much did that affect overall GDP? How much that increase in government spending affect overall GDP? And then we see what the difference is. And that's the calculation we have here. All right. I want to, it's 8:50, and I think I want to stop here with this last little note. Oh, we made it just to, oh yeah, okay, all right. So our time is good today. Last two notes, all right. Just definition of contractionary and expansionary fiscal policies. Expansionary is just a policy that causes GDP to go up. And contractionary is just a policy that causes GDP to go down. That's all. So what am I going to do? So this won't be till tomorrow. I am going to write up a new set of homework for you, give you something to play with. It's going to be almost entirely this sort of fiscal policy stuff. And I want you to certainly work very closely with your notes to make sure that you are following the step-by-step procedure and we understand what's going on. One thing I do want to caution you on is the tax multiplier. You see here an increase in taxes of $70.77 million. Right? And we plug that into our GDP formula as a positive 70.77 million because taxes went up by 70.77 million. If taxes had fallen by 70.77 million, this would have been a negative 70.77 million. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
A decline in taxes will mean that this number would be negative, this 70.77 million. So the only wrinkle in all of this is that when you're looking at these questions, making sure that when you see whether it's an increase or decrease in taxes is going to tell you whether this value here is positive or negative. The multiplier is always going to be negative, but if you are reducing taxes, so this is, say, for example, if this was a decrease in taxes, let's say this was the decrease in taxes of 70.77 million. That would make this minus 70.77. And as you all know, a minus 70.77 multiplied by a minus 4, a minus times a minus is a positive, right? Negative times negative is a positive. Economically, what we're saying is that if government reduces taxes, you would expect GDP to go up. Because if government reduces taxes, that means more of our money we're leaving in our pockets, in our pocketbooks, in our bank accounts. That's the money that we get to spend. So you would expect then that GDP to go up in that case. That's all we're saying. Right? So I will prepare a set of homework questions, probably about no more than 10, for you to practice on over the weekend. When I say practice, they will be graded. So I do want you to take it seriously. If you hand them in on Monday, I'll have them back to you on Wednesday. And what we want to do, as we begin wrapping things up, we'll talk very briefly about money banking in the central bank, right? And that will be our last issue. And that shouldn't take us more than a class, maybe class and a half at the most. And then we'll begin looking at what we need to know for the final exam. All right. So I do want to get through one more homework. That way you would have done 4 homework for the semester, which I think is not bad. And then we'll talk about the exam. All right, any questions? All right, in that case, folks, if you have any questions when you get your homework, please feel free to give me a call or text and email first. And I'm happy to walk through any problems that you may have. All right.
All right, sir.
All right, folks, in that case, then, thank you very much. I will see you guys on Monday.
Good night, all.